I was 14 when the first one happened. It was an August night in the small town where my parents still lived, the kind of heat that made the wood of the porch sweat and the air feel like a blanket. My friends and I had been dared to play hide-and-seek after midnight behind the old community center, a squat brick building that smelled faintly of oil and old paint. We agreed on simple rules: stay inside the perimeter of the field, no going into the maintenance shed, and no leaving until someone called time. We laughed, shoved each other, and the game felt like an ordinary dare that proves nothing and means everything. At first it was all childish shouts and the scrape of sneakers on gravel. Then, during my turn to count, I heard a noise that did not fit. It was a slow, deliberate scraping against a chain-link fence, close enough to make the hairs on my forearm lift. What started as a stupid midnight game became the night none of us ever spoke about the same way again. You will hear the details I promised, and you will have to decide if a place you thought was safe could be different when no one is watching. Even now, when I smell wet grass or hear metal on metal, I feel my chest tighten like it did that night. The police came later and took statements, but some things do not fit into a report. I grew up with my father working nights at the depot and my mother folding shirts at the dry cleaner. As kids, we learned to keep the lights on when he left and to lock doors early because it felt like safety came in small rituals. I learned to read the weather by the way the curtains stuck to the windows and to tell if someone had been in the kitchen by whether the sugar bag had been moved. Those details sound mundane, but they shaped how I noticed things others dismissed. In middle school, I read mysteries until my eyes hurt and spent afternoons building forts in the trees with Jason and Maya. I was the quiet one who counted the steps and noticed smells. School taught me to hide nervousness under humor. After a car crash when I was 11, my mother stopped sleeping well, and we started locking every door at night, even when guests were over. That bruise of worry never fully left, and it made me both cautious and painfully aware of moments when the world did not align. My friends teased me for being cautious, but later they would thank me without words. By the time I was 14, I had a small reputation for knowing shortcuts through backyards and for being able to whisper directions without losing my place. I was the one who remembered where the loose board was behind the bleachers, who could feel the wind change before anyone else. Those little skills became a kind of currency in our group of 6: Jason, Maya, Tyler, Lena, Sam, and me. We were good at making ordinary nights into stories. That night behind the community center started like every dare-mangling teen game we had played. We took turns, and the boundary between yard and shed felt like an invitation and a rule at the same time. The scare that followed felt like a test of those rituals of safety we had learned as kids. The first game took place under a low iron light that hummed instead of glowing. I closed my eyes and counted to 50 with my face in my hands, the gravel biting at my knees. The air smelled of cut grass and the faint metallic tang of the chain link. I heard feet moving, a laugh from somewhere toward the parking lot, and then an odd breath that was not one of us. I counted louder to drown it out. When I finished, I called out, "Ready or not, here I come," and my voice felt small in the open field. I started by checking behind the bleachers. Jason had told me the trick once about checking the joints between boards because kids never thought to slide their bodies into gaps. I crouched, ran my fingers along splintered wood, felt dust and the sticky residue of someone else's sweat. There was no one. I checked under the metal picnic tables where Maya sometimes curled up, the smell of crushed grass and old fries, and found Tyler sighing like a cat stuck in a closet. We laughed, which made the game feel harmless again, until we heard a heavy dragging sound along the fence that ran behind the field. "Who did that?" Tyler whispered, the word barely breath. "Probably a raccoon," Jason said, but his voice did not carry the usual swagger. It hugged the syllables like he was trying to make them safe. "That sounded like a long, slow pull," Lena said, and the way she said it made the hair at the base of my neck stand up. "Maybe it was the wind," Sam offered quickly, maybe more for his own sake than ours. We spread out to keep the game going, because doing nothing felt worse than pretending everything was fine. I crawled into the maintenance door alcove where a pile of discarded chairs created a shadow cavern. The wood smelled of mildew, my palms were dusty, and the small lamp above the door hummed with a sharp electrical note. I could hear conversations like thread weaving through the dark, people guessing and dodging, and the occasional childish squeal. But under those normal sounds came a rhythm that did not belong. It was the soft, patient scrape of something against metal, and then a click like a latch being tested. It was close to me and also farther away, as if the sound itself had a scale and could be both small and vast. "Tom, you okay?" Maya asked, and I realized my breath had been shallow. I answered that I was fine, and she said something about my face going pale. The game continued, and the scraping stopped. We called time and gathered at the base of the flagpole, telling ourselves versions of the story that made everyone the braver one. We started a new round because the dare demanded escalation. The new rules were simple and stupidly brave. Whoever hid in the maintenance shed stayed there until someone checked 3 times, and no one left the field. I went in last. The shed smelled like oil and old rope. My hands brushed against a coil of wire and felt grit. My cheek passed against a cold metal cabinet, and the taste of iron sprang into my mouth like a memory of blood. I curled into a pile of tarps with only my fingertips exposed and listened. My heartbeat had a steady tick that seemed to match the hum above the door. Voices of the others came fragmented and softer, as if the dark absorbed sound like a sponge. After a while, I heard steps on the shed roof. They were not light. They sounded deliberate and heavy, like someone settling their weight and then shifting it slowly. A shadow passed over the narrow window. I held my breath until my lungs burned. If you had been there, you might have told yourself first that it was one of the other kids, or a cat, or the town raccoon. We said those things to each other later. But the shape outside the window was a vertical absence. It did not move like a person, more like a silhouette being observed from the inside of a photograph. I could see the hint of a shoulder and the darker absence where a face might be. I felt an instinct to make noise, to call out, to break the silence, but something in my chest stayed my tongue. Maybe it was the habit of learning to listen for danger, a muscle honed by years of small alarms. I waited there until the roof stopped creaking. When I slipped out the door, mud on my shoes, everyone was looking at each other with the same blank, frightened expression. "Did someone go up there?" Jason asked, and then said the name like a prayer. "No," I said, but my voice sounded thin. "I thought I saw something." "Like what?" Tyler asked, stepping closer until he bumped into me like a boy seeking proof. "Like someone watching," I said, and the words left a taste of cold air. We searched the perimeter with beams of flashlights, voices higher now because fear raises pitch. We circled the maintenance shed and the chain-link fence, the lights tracing the gravel and the shadow under the swing set. There were no footprints outside the field, none slicing through the grass where someone would have walked. The fence had one long smear along it, where the reflector had been torn free and lay twisted on the ground, and we noticed that the chain had small gouges, like something heavy had been rubbed against it. We told ourselves about branches and wind and misaligned metal. The police log later would note vandalism to park property, which fit the facts but not the fear. When officers came the next day, they took statements and dusted for prints. Their gloves smelled like plastic and coffee. Their method was methodical. They photographed the torn reflector, measured the gouges, and found no shoe prints beyond the fence. In 3 short procedural paragraphs, which I will summarize here, the officer explained they used luminol and took swabs for DNA, logged each statement at the station, and closed the case pending any new evidence. That explanation was precise, short, and sterile compared to the feeling of being watched. The first CTA comes here because after that initial scrape, we were already invested in what might follow. If you were in my place, what would you do next? If you had a choice to play on or to bolt, tell me in the comments, starting with my place I would, so I can see how different this would look through other people's eyes. Your answers help me know if I'm alone in thinking there was something off about that night, and they help others recognize small signs they might have ignored. Okay, back to the story. After the police left and declared the scene non-criminal in the sense of human trespass, we were left with more questions than answers. The group fractured into people who wanted to joke and people who wanted to go home. We decided, because we were always daring each other, to have one last game played in the dark, but this time in pairs. I partnered with Maya, and we hid behind the bleachers again. The radio static from a passing car sounded far away, and the stitches of moonlight through the chain link made spears of silver on the ground. We heard footsteps approach, and then pause. Maya squeezed my hand so tight I felt the bone in her palm. She breathed out, "You feel that too, right?" And I nodded, though my nod was small. "Maybe we should just stop," Maya whispered. "Not yet," I said, but my voice cracked. "We will stick to the lights." Then something moved in the far corner of the field, where the tall grass met the parking lot. It was a silhouette, upright, and it walked with a slow, deliberate step that made the ground sound wrong. For the second time, the world gave us a noise that could not be claimed by animals or boys. The silhouette stopped, turned its head as if scanning the crowd, and then raised a hand to the fence. It did not climb, it did not call, it simply leaned against the chain link, causing that same long scraping sound we had first heard. For a moment it held that pose like a figure in an old photograph, and then it walked away without a sound that matched its weight. That was the second occurrence, the one that pulled rational explanations apart. The difference was not just that we heard it, but that several of us saw it from different vantage points and described the same oddness. Tyler swore it had been taller than any of us, and that it moved like a shadow that forgot to make noise. Lena said she had smelled something then, a wet, cold smell like metal and earth mixed together. Sam said he had felt the ground tremble at the step. Evidence that the world had shifted was only in our sensations and in the torn reflector. The rational voices said coincidence. The rest of us started to feel smaller inside the known spaces of the field. A week later, long after the scrape and the silhouette, Lena invited us to her parents' house for a sleepover in the backyard. She said it was stupid to stop living and that sleepovers made the world less empty. Her backyard was small, with a shed and a tall privacy fence and the scent of lemon trees in bloom. We played behind the swing set, and then, because the night wanted stories, we started a game of hide and seek again. The rules this time were even dumber. Whoever hid behind the fence could stay there until the others came to check. I rolled my eyes, and then hid because habit is a force. I squeezed through a gap between boards where the wood had warped with age, and the splinters snagged my jeans. The smell of lemon and damp wood filled my nose, and the roughness of the fence pressed into my cheek. The night was still. I could hear Lena humming to herself on the porch, an off-key tune that made me think of old televisions and the distant hum of a delivery truck on the street. When I pushed my face through a different gap to peek, I saw something on the other side that did not belong. It was a pale, vertical shape tucked near the corner of the fence, as still as a nail. For a second, I thought it was a mannequin, left over from a school theater, but there was a wetness to it like a sheen on skin. The thing tilted its head, and I heard, clear as a bell, the sound of breath forced through a mouth that was not speaking. My stomach fell as if I had stepped into cold water. I jerked back and scrambled out to tell the others, but my voice broke. Maya said I looked white as a sheet and asked me what I had seen. I told them, and they laughed at first, because laughter is the safe language of teenagers. Jason said it was a coat on a fence post. Tyler said it was probably a trick of light. But then Sam said he had felt a drop on his neck, like a bead of cold water. And Lena said she had found small wet smudges on the other side of the fence where a hand might have rested. The third occurrence forced a choice. Someone said we should tell Lena's parents, and someone else said we would be in trouble for being out so late. I remember being the voice of compromise. "We tell and we stay the night here," I said. "We make them check." The group argued with the kind of intensity reserved for small things that mean a lot when you are young. And finally, Jason marched to the back door to wake Lena's father. He was a heavy, slow man who smelled like pipe smoke even at midnight. He opened the door grumpy and put on the expression of a man who had been woken for the wrong war. Jason explained quickly, stumbling over words, and the father listened with a face that first folded into annoyance and then into attention. He took the flashlight and the keychain and crossed the yard with his hands in his pockets like a man moving through rituals. We followed, our shoes whispering on the grass. He checked the fence with the kind of thoroughness you give to things you think you understand. He found the wet smudges, he ran his gloved fingers along the top of the fence and noticed scratch marks like those at the community center. He frowned, and then he did something I will not forget. He said, "Stay inside. I will call the police." The night the police came to Lena's house, the process was clinical. An officer with tired brown eyes took our statements separately, asking the same questions in steady tones. He explained that they would log the property damage and a patrol would be increased in the area. He used clear words about how they would photograph the scratches, collect any physical traces, and check for local camera footage. He said it was likely vandalism, but that the pattern of our reports would be useful if there were repeats. In a precise 300-character summary, the officer described collection steps. They photographed, documented, swabbed for foreign DNA, and checked nearby surveillance. That made the situation sound like something that fit into boxes and files. It did not fit the cold breath against the fence, or the way Lena's father looked at us as if we had grown a new knowledge overnight. I will not paint every argument and every laugh as a lie. We tried to normalize it. We joked about it the next week until the joke lost its shape. The game that started to feel like a test of our courage had left marks nobody else could explain fully. We kept playing other games, but we stopped hiding in places that felt like fingertips of the dark. Those small choices added up. We stopped walking home the long way, and we started to leave the lights on in cars until the doors shut with a solid click. Months later, when school returned and the novelty of teenage fear dulled into caution, a new rumor started. A neighbor had found a bundle of old coats in a hollow behind the community center, neatly folded and smelling of damp earth. Some of the coats had small cuts on them, as if something had been dragged through thorny brush. The adult world called it a homeless encampment or evidence of transience. We called it confirmation of something we had seen but could not name. Questions that once seemed simple gained edges. There are two moments that still make my hands tremble when I tell them. The first happened on a rainy Tuesday when a friend decided to prank us by hiding a mirror behind the bleachers so someone hiding might see themselves and think a face lurked there. It was supposed to be a joke. Instead, at 2 a.m, I hid behind those bleachers with the mirror already set up and watched through the crack as a shape slid past the field and paused, just long enough to look directly at the mirror. In the reflection, the shape did not have a face. It had a suggestion of depth where eyes should be, but nothing that could be recognized. I called out, too loud, and the shape did not turn toward my voice. It walked past as if the sound were part of the room and not an interruption. My knees failed, and I crawled out, the taste of copper in my mouth like I had bitten my lip raw. The second moment came when, a month later, a neighbor kitty chased a rat into the hollow behind the center and found there a small footprint pressed into mud that was too small to be any of us and too neat to be animal. It was a human-like print, but with proportions wrong, and it pressed me with the idea that someone or something had the ability to be human and not at the same time. Each of those moments sat in my chest like stones, impossible to explain away with boredom or coincidence. The final night of the long arc arrived on a clear October evening. We had agreed to meet at the park one last time to face whatever had been among us. We were older by then, bodies lanky and voices lower, but the impulse to map the unknown remained. We decided to run one last game, in which Jason would hide at the far corner behind the maintenance shed, and the rest of us would check together. We went as a group, flashlights jittering, breath steaming in the cooling air. At a certain point, we heard the same slow scrape against the chain link that had started all of this. It was closer. It came from between the shed and the small stream that cut through the park. We moved like a single living thing, shoulders brushing, voices low. When we rounded the corner, we saw movement near the water. Lena pointed, and then her fingers shook. There, outlined against the moonlit grass, was a figure standing half submerged in the shallow waterbank, its reflection wrong and static. It had something in its hand, long and thin, and it seemed to be dragging it along the mud to make a mark. We approached with knives of light and shouted at once. The figure did not run. It turned slowly, and for a beat the world held its breath with us. Its face, when it turned, was a negative of the human face, with the mouth pulled tight and the eyes like wells. It did not speak, it only tilted its head, and then, with a movement that was too quick and too fluid, it threw, whatever it held, into the water. The object clinked and vanished. The sound was the last ordinary thing we would hear for a while. We did the only human thing we could think of. We ran. Jason pushed past me, and I remember his hand on my shoulder like an apology and a promise. We fled toward the lights of the parking lot, the hiss of shoes on gravel, and the ragged music of panicked breath. We reached the road and poured into cars, doors banging and keys clutched like talismans. Someone called 911, and the operator's voice was precise and calm. Patrol cars came and lights bled red and blue across the grass. Officers waded into the shallow stream with long poles, their faces hard with concentration. They did not find the figure. They did find the smooth absence where something had been, and the series of strange gouges along the bank, like the marks of nails. They noted our statements and took fingerprints from shoes and hands. And then they took photographs of the stream and the grass and the marks that did not belong in any file they could explain. The procedural explanation for what followed was given in careful, technical terms in the police report. They logged our accounts, checked for CCTV from nearby businesses, canvassed neighbors for sightings, and drained sections of the shallow stream as far as permits allowed. They used luminol to check for biological traces and swabbed the gouges along the bank for DNA. In a short, clear statement that fits the requirement of a technical summary, the detective said they found no matching DNA to known offenders nearby, and that no footage captured the silhouette. That left us with a formal record and an informal terror. The officers were respectful and serious and assured us that patrols would be increased, but they admitted the possibility that what we saw might not fit any known pattern of crime. After that night, none of us went to the park alone. We stopped playing hide and seek in public backyards, and we started to give the adult world the outline of our fear in clumsy, factual statements. Parents tightened rules, phones stayed on. The small rituals we had once used to feel safe expanded into a web of new precautions. We were no longer daring each other. We were watching the behavior of shadows. 1 month later, I could count our changes in small acts. We had all slept in different rooms at home for a while, and I would turn on a light in the hallway before getting up, as if light were a shield. I found myself avoiding the west corner of the field when I drove past it because the angle of the sun in the afternoon made the fence look like teeth. The group text was quieter. We sent one another photos of mundane things as proof we were okay. The police called once to ask follow-up questions. The memory of the scraping and the figure persisted like a fresh bruise. We had not shared all the details with adults because some of those details felt too embarrassing to put into words, but the ones we did share were enough to keep patrols in the area for a while. I started carrying a small flashlight on my keychain even when I went out for cigarettes with the adults, and at night I left the bathroom light on because the glow reminded me that things can be arranged into patterns you understand. I found it difficult to sleep without the radio on soft, as if voice could be a barrier. My hands would still tremble when I remembered the face in the reflection. 3 months after the last night, things looked like they might return to ordinary. The news covered a burglary uptown, and the town turned its attention. Our text group grew louder again, with jokes and memes and the old snark. Yet beneath the laughter was a new set of habits. Locks checked twice, headlights left on, a chorus of keys at the door. Lena moved her bed to the other wall and kept curtains closed, though there was no rational reason to be so cautious. One of our group, Sam, started carrying pepper spray and swore loudly that anyone who made him feel small again would get more than a hiss of defense. A neighbor reported hearing scraping at his back gate, but when the officer checked, there was nothing to be found. The pattern of small incidents kept the fear at the surface without letting it ossify into panic. 6 months later, the town had new faces at the council meeting, asking about increased patrols near parks and municipal property. The parents in our group spoke to the mayor and signed a petition for better lighting. There were small victories. Some bulbs were replaced, shrubs trimmed. But the scraping sound visited other people too now and then, or at least they called to say they had. I found myself, sometimes at night, awake and tracing the sound of my own breath, wondering if some quiet thing had decided to wedge itself into the corners of our routines. The most tangible change was in me. I learned to ask for company on dark walks. I learned to say aloud to friends, "Do you want me to come in with you?" and mean it. I learned that safety is not a single act, but a series of soft agreements, and that fear can be shared so it becomes manageable. We never got a satisfying answer. The police files remained technically open, with notes about property damage and unidentifiable biological traces, but none of it connected to a person they could charge. The official line was that vandalism and urban wildlife accounted for some of the marks, and that human imagination amplified the rest. That played out in a simple procedural explanation that made me think of officers doing their jobs with limited evidence. They photographed the scene, collected samples, interviewed witnesses, and then logged everything into the system. That process felt efficient and somehow insufficient all at once. The truth I carry is less tidy than a report. It is a string of sensations and images that do not resolve into a neat explanation. The scrape of metal on chain link, the reflection without a face, the slow silhouette, the wet smudges, the wrong footprint. Those things are scattered like seeds that grew into a pattern only we can see. Some nights I am able to speak about it with a kind of clinical distance, and other nights I cannot name it without feeling the old tightening in my chest. We kept living and we kept telling ourselves stories to explain the unknown. The games we played evolved into other rites of passage, fewer of them in the dark. If you think about your own childhood games, you will probably recall a boundary you promised not to cross, a rule that gave a field its meaning. Hide and seek relies on those invisible limits. That is why these tales are unsettling. They show what happens when the line between safe and dangerous blurs without warning. I tell you this not to frighten you gratuitously, but to offer a confession and a warning. The ordinary can twist. The solved can remain unresolved. Sometimes the only answer is to change how you move through the places you thought were familiar. If this story made you feel uneasy, please take a second to subscribe for more first-person accounts and to share your own memory, starting with My Place, which helps build our community of listeners. If you're uncomfortable talking about it publicly, you can message anonymously. I read everything, and your experiences help shape future episodes. Everything changed after those nights in small, soft ways, and in ways that tighten your chest. The police did what they could, the town added lights and replaced broken reflectors, the park gained a new rule that nothing should be left against a fence overnight. We moved on, as all of us do, but the memory remains as a faint, permanent ache. I never play hide and seek in the dark anymore, and when someone suggests it, I can feel bile rise in my throat. The last line I will leave you with is short and honest. Sometimes the thing that hides is not looking to be found, and that makes all the difference. If this left you unsettled, please share your story in the comments and subscribe to hear more true accounts like this one.